Welcome to the ChinnyVision zone. Get ready. Space Harrier was a 1985 arcade game by Sega, released in December 1985 in Japan. Didn't hit the UK until around the middle of 1986. It's fair to say Space Harrier obsessed me a bit as a kid. We used to visit Southsea in Portsmouth quite often, and there was an arcade there at Clarence Pier that I've mentioned before, and they had all the latest arcade games in there. And one day, in the middle of, must be 1986, when the arcade game hit the UK, this beast, I can only describe it as a beast, turned up at the front of the arcade. It was a big thing that you sat down in, almost sat in a hydraulic arm. It was obvious that this thing would move around. And it wasn't turned on, but people were still looking at it. And it was the Space Harrier deluxe version, the full hydraulic cabinet. Well, actually, it's not. People used to say it was hydraulic. It wasn't, but we'll come on to that. A few weeks later, visited again, and the machine was on, and you saw it doing its business. And there was a crowd of people around the machine, and a queue of people to get on it. And it was 50p for 9 lives, or you could pay for 20p for 3 lives. So obviously, because Space Harrier was a fairly tough game, most people I think went for the 50p option. And for those first few months, there was always a crowd around this latest and greatest arcade machine. Now sadly, I don't have any pictures of Clarence Pier back in the day with the Space Harrier Deluxe cabinet, and certainly not with me playing it. However, I recently unearthed some photos of me having a day trip on the Isle of Wight at Sandown, and here we go. I seem to have spent quite a lot of my film having photos taken of me on the Space Harrier arcade machine. I even tried to take photos of the screen. I don't think this is the deluxe version. I think it's the standard sit-down version without the movement. As I said, the machine wasn't actually hydraulic. It worked on a standard motor that moved up and left and right, but people thought it was hydraulic. So enough misty-eyed reminiscing. How do the home systems manage to replicate an arcade machine with all that movement, 2 Motorola 68000 processors, a sound co-processor that's a Z80 that's the same as the main processor in a Spectrum and an Amstrad CPC? How have they managed it? Well, first of all, we're going to start on Sega's own home system, the Sega Master System. And this is ported by Sega themselves. This was a game that you saw mentioned in relation to the Master System when it was first released in the UK. Fairly low-key launch of the Master System. You used to see it promoted in the back of computer and video games when Mastertronic were selling it. So you got the standard Space Harrier title screen there, slightly garish standard Master System graphics. I've used the colour yellow there actually, when white probably would have been more appropriate. And off we go, checkerboard landscape. And because this is a 50Hz machine, it's going to be a little bit slower than it would have been in the USA and Japan. Smiley face on the back of your rocket pack there. I find that slightly irritating, to be honest. And it's trying to replicate the arcade here on the Master System. There's a few sprite issues. I say sprites. Someone was saying these aren't actually sprites. These are background graphics or something. It's cheating because the Master System couldn't do all this with its standard sprite. So all these graphics you see, and the reason they're so jerky is because I think these are all background graphics it's using, and it's scaling them up. Well, it's not scaling them up, they're just drawn differently to give the impression of scaling. The original arcade machine had all that very complex and expensive scaling hardware to throw these 2D graphics, and they are 2D graphics, around, and on a home system you don't have that processing power, so all these graphics on the Master System here are pre-drawn as opposed to scaling. And you can see there's overlap issues, almost a bit like a Tribute Clash, really, on a Spectrum, except without the ugliness of the colour. You see it on the edges fairly often. I don't know if you can see it at the moment, but as you can see on the explosions there on the edges and the trees, they come towards you. On the Master System, you get 3 lives. 3 lives and that's it. Luckily, there's a cheat that's going to enable us to get a little bit further into the game. Well, it gives you this. You can actually end up having just some continues. Basically, this is ludicrously hard for no continues, 3 lives. That's it. got the dragon. This is one of the end of level baddies. There's always a big end of level baddie in Space Harrier. And we have to shoot the dragon in the head only. And then he turns red and there you go, he explodes. Stage 2 onto GEEZA. Change of colours. I have to say, I wonder what this is like in 60 Hz. It's probably... It just feels... The music sounds slowed down. It just feels a little bit too slow. It has to be said. Although these Master System graphics are quite nice. I've taken this on to level 3 just so we can see some different graphics. And look at the mushrooms on the ground, all those colours. This doesn't look too impressive today, but when this came out, this would have looked fairly good. Again, look at that colouring on that floating jellyfish, whatever it is, thing. Almost 16-bit like. End of this level, we should have a dual-headed dragon. Alright, here we go. Yeah, the poor Master System struggling a little bit with this as it slows down. The impression you get here on the Master System is it's doing its best, really, against all the hardware limitations. They've really tried here to make an accurate port of the arcade, but of course it's kind of a lost cause. And as we see here on level 4, they've bought the... So you've got the skies kind of moved in, if you see what I mean. So you've got that replicated from the arcade. But if you look on those towers, just the background blocks around them, it just doesn't quite work. It's ironic that Sega are advertising the Master System as having the arcade games in your home. And yeah, you have got the arcade games in your home, and there are plenty of Master System games that are quite more accurate than this. But, well, that said, you know, we need to look at the other 8-bit versions as well, because I can tell you that for nothing, there's the bonus stage that we're now on certainly isn't any of the other 8-bit versions. So the Master System, it's doing its best here, but it's struggling. And if you don't know what Space Harrier bonus level is, every few levels you get to ride on a dragon, and you've got to smash as many trees as possible for bonus points. So we're over to the C64, port by Elite Systems. Nice loading screen graphic here, faithful to the arcade. Not so yellowy as the Master System version was. And programmed by Elite Systems for Christmas '86, this would have come out. Well, I didn't see it reviewed certainly on the Amstrad till March '87. So I've got SID music here, and I've got a cheat on, because yeah, you're going to see why. My friend had this on his C64, got it on budget in about 1990. And to be honest, as an Amstrad owner, back in 1990, this kept me laughing all year. That and Chase HQ coming out, I couldn't believe my luck. And he bought both these games. And I'm done laughing at the C64 version of Space Harrier, so I really need to try and look at this objectively. And the SID rendition of the theme tune's very nice. The levels are over very quickly. It does have speed. It does have speed, it has to be said, but it's very primitive. The suggestion is this version was put out slightly unfinished, and that there's an American version, or a version Elite made for the American market, that is more finished, but I need to really look at the UK version, to be honest. It's just that little bit too fast. You know, I'm playing it here with a cheat that makes it slightly more bearable, but without a cheat, you know, I don't recall us getting beyond about level 4 when we used to play this on my friend's C64, and that was with a lot of practice. Better get this dragon now. He's white. One more. There we go. So on to level 2. It does have a nice turn of speed. And it gives a more... It's doing the same non-scaling, so to speak, thing the Master System version does, but it's faster. If the Master System was this fast, it would be quite good. And this is stage 4, which normally the... Actually, no. This should be stage 3. They've got levels 3 and 4 transpose in this version by the looks of it. This is actually level 3 on the other versions, including the arcade. They put C64 brown as the sky colour on this version, and Space Harrier is certainly not a game that's supposed to be drab. On to level 6, and just to reiterate, I'm playing this with a cheat. I've never got this far before without a cheat on. And it quickly becomes apparent that Space Harrier with 16 unique levels in the... I think it's 16 unique levels in the arcade, and certainly the other 8-bit versions have a pretty good approximation of that. On the C64 version, level 6 is actually level 1. That's right, there's only 6 levels. It loops round to give the impression of more levels. It's pretty much unfinished, and I'm afraid pretty much unplayable. Over to the Amstrad CPC, a game I got for my birthday, probably March 87 possibly. Ooh, could have been 88, I can't remember. And I remember playing this in the morning before I went to school. Loading up, got Outrun at the same time. I think I got this March 88, so I got Outrun at the same time. And the thing that hit me first of all is, what is going on with the graphics? They're vectors. And, you know, it's not just the trees, it's everything. And I was pretty disappointed when I saw this. I was expecting something a little bit more solid. But what I came to realise is this is actually a pretty neat design decision by the programmers of Space Harrier on the CPC, because it keeps the speed up. In the first few levels, the enemy patterns are the same as the arcade, and that combined with a nice turn of speed, although you can't shoot the trees, which is annoying. But with the nice turn of speed here, it's, even if it doesn't look the part of the arcade, it plays pretty well. My main complaints are the fact you can't shoot the trees on level 1, which means you end up flying into them a lot of the time, and the narrow playfield, but again, I guess that's a speed thing. It must have been a brave programmer to think, well, the only way we can do this is with vector graphics, because the Z80 is rather good at doing vectors, and you know, with no extra graphics hardware in the CPC, it wasn't going to be very good at scaling the graphics. You only need to look at Space Harrier 2 to see what a mess that was on the CPC and how slow it was. I put a lot of time into this game, because it was the only way I could play Space Harrier at home, and I loved the arcade machine. But I pretty much now have to accept that they've had to make a compromise here, and you've really got to take a view of, is it a worthwhile compromise to be making? I forwarded this on to level 4, and this should be the one. This is Cecile, where the sky closes in. We're over to level 5 now. This is where we depart a little bit, because the CPC version doesn't have things like the robots, and some of the enemies start to look a bit weird when you get onto here. First few levels 1, 2 and 3, certainly on the CPC, they're really trying to replicate the arcade right down to the enemy patterns that they attack you at, and then it starts to go into a little bit of a mess with these. I mean, what is that, an Adidas logo flying at me? And I've got no lives left, I'm on my final life, and this was a tough game. Part of me wants to congratulate the programmers for achieving this and making a brave decision to port this to the CPC. You just think, well, it is Space Harrier, but in some ways it isn't. Over the Sinclair Spectrum, and this is a version that it was the last 8-bit version I played. I bought this on budget. I saw it on budget and in the early 90s, and I picked it up and bought it just to see what it was like. Curiosity, really, from a bit of a rabid Space Harrier fan. And it's a 48K only game. Unfortunately, there's no music, which does take away a lot of the atmosphere. It moves around okay. The spare key, with its efficient display, manages to move things around. The sprites are a little bit small. Again, you wonder if this had been ported to the CPC. Well, the CPC wouldn't have been able to shift these graphics around like this. It's certainly got speed, but what it lacks, and partly I think it's the music, is atmosphere. Space Harrier in the arcade was a cacophony of graphics and sound and movement and all this other stuff that led to a great atmosphere. And at least on the C64 and CPC, they've got the music, and which is and they're decent renditions as well. Whereas on the Specky, because it's 48K only, it's just a little bit lacking. And the dragon, and none of the baddies feel really big either. Even the big end of level dragons, they just flick around. They're fairly small. On to level 2. Nicer colours here. Yellow and blue, and also, is that 2 colours in use in the sky, or is it just the way actually it might be the way my LCD screen looks. It makes it look like there's 2 shades, but I don't think the Spectrum's got that grey I'm seeing. I think it's just the angle I'm sitting at. And yeah, it's fairly decent. You just wish you had that CPC music, and then it would really be, have that little bit more atmosphere. It's competent, it plays okay, but on limited hardware, it just fails to convey the excitement and the graphical and the sound excellence of the arcade. Over to the Atari ST, and I first played this on my friend's Atari ST because he got one of those packs with the ST that came with lots of games like Outrun and Space Harrier, Carrier Command, and quite a few others. And it's as I remembered it. The only way to play it is with a mouse. I have double checked, I've been through the instructions, and no, there's no reference to being able to use a joystick, and that's exactly as my memory was. So we've got 16-bit quality graphics and sound here, nice rendition of the Space Harrier music. A weird graphic going on the right there, presumably just to reduce the screen size, I don't know. It's just, and again, the programmers at Elite have decided to put their names on the status display, just like the Spectrum version. Weird playing it with a mouse, it really is weird. I know the arcade machine had analog controls, so with a centering joystick, so it depended on how you moved it. Excessive colouring in the skyline there. It's just one of those 16-bit things. We got lots of colours, we're going to stick them all in there, even though the arcade doesn't have them, and the arcade's far more powerful hardware. We've got an Atari ST with all these colours, so we're going to stick loads of colours in there. Game slowed down, dragons come on the screen, has slowed down a fair bit. Only 3 lives on the ST version, but you do get continues. So we'll see how far we can get into the game. I'm really not buying this whole playing a game with a mouse thing. It's ridiculous. I mean, unless I'm really missing something, there's no other way to control this game. And it certainly tallies with my recollections. And come on, programmers, give us a joystick option. It's not a lot of effort, is it? You've gone to all the effort putting the mouse in, but no, we've got no option for joystick. Right, that's the dragon finished off there. And you've got a bit of a wait while it loads level 2. Space Harrier on the ST is a bit of a disk access nightmare, if you tell the truth. There's a lot of waiting around when you load it up, and between levels as well. Finally, level 2 starts. And again, the graphics are nice, and nice brown colour scheme, and the stripy ground there. It's all very nice here on the ST, but it does slow down. The animation's a little bit jerky as well. And that combined with the mouse controls just makes it a little bit finicky, really. On level 3, and one of the things that's striking about the ST version is, looking back at that Master System version, it's a shame the graphics aren't quite as colourful as the Master System version on the ST. That's not quite as striking. The colours are slightly muted. And oh, big slowdown. Oh, this is really slowed down with a double-headed dragon. It really does. It means it's harder to move your character, and it means it's harder to see what the enemy is firing at you, because you get about 3 frames of animation for the flame things he's launching at you. So will level 4, or more loading, will level 4 have the sky, I don't want like a ceiling? Will level 4 have a ceiling? That's the correct term, I don't know. Incidentally, talking about the arcade machine, I remember playing the game one time, getting quite far, and just having a small crowd around me watching, which was my only time in an arcade where I had any level of excellence that appeared to impress people. No, there's no ceiling on this level, and due to the increased amount of stuff on screen, the frame rate has slowed right down, making it nearly impossible to see what's coming towards you. Oh, no, death again. Right, over to the Amiga. Nice loading screen. And different programmers here on the Amiga, but it's still a mouse-only game. Why? Got a full screen, though. No stupid things up the right-hand side. Very fast here on the Amiga. Now, this is an accelerated Amiga. And I have looked at what it runs like on the A500, and it seems to run at this speed or thereabouts. Perhaps a little bit slower. So I'm going to take this at face value. You do get 9 lives on this version when you start up, which is nice. And it looks good. Nice tune. The graphics scale nicely. And there doesn't appear to be any slowdown, although it is quite fast. I'm sure this is too fast. I'm sure the versions I'm looking at that claim to be A500 versions are too fast as well. But I could be wrong. One difference between the Amiga and the ST versions is on the Amiga version, if you hold down the mouse button, you auto-fire. On the ST version, you've got to keep on clicking the mouse button in order to fire. So that's one difference. It makes the Amiga version a lot easier. You've got this auto-fire the entire time, which means it's quite easy to finish off everything in your path. Although you're still going to crash into rocks like that. The sound sample in the Amiga version, like the arcade version, somebody at Elite has done them himself.
Get ready.
Oh my goodness me, that's terrible. Why did anybody do that? Why not just sample the arcade like they did in the ST version? I think they did in the ST version. That sounds awful. That sounds like someone they just dragged in off the street to say, get ready. Oh, dear me. So, Space Harrier. A massive arcade game. One of the most advanced of its era. And certainly going back to my recollections of the crowds around it and the movement and the sound, the graphics, and all those colours and that processing power in it. It was always going to be a big ask to get it onto the home systems. The Sega Master System is a brave attempt. 50Hz isn't helping it, but for a game of its era, it's certainly a brave attempt. The 3 8-bit home micro versions, C64 Spectrum and Amstrad CPC. C64 version, I'm trying to find the positives in it, but it's fairly obvious the game isn't finished or the programmers had to rush it. It has to be said, which is a bit of a shame because I like the music and the speed's good as well. It's just really a little bit Spartan and it loops over after the first 6 or so levels. Bit of a shame. Amstrad CPC, they've taken the brave option of saying, yeah, field sprites aren't going to work on the CPC. It can't scale that. It's going to be a mess. So we're going to do it in vectors. And visually that means it isn't as arresting as something like the Sega Master System version. But in hindsight, when you look at Space Harrier 2 on the CPC, which has field sprites, it's slow, it's awful. I think they did the right thing by changing it to vector graphics on the CPC. Spectrum version on limited hardware, it's always going to be a big ask to convert a big arcade game to the Spectrum. A 128K version here would have helped if they doubled those later on with the music, because the graphics are quite nice, it moves around fairly well, but it just lacks that atmosphere. The music isn't there, and it's a big surprise. I can't seem to find anyone's done a hack where they've added the CPC music to the Spectrum and created a 128K version. That'd be a really wonderful thing. ST and Amiga, well, the ST version looks the part, but massive slowdown, massive animation problems, and the mouse control is horrible. Please, goodness me, why no joystick control? What were they thinking? On the Amiga, it's a bit better, it's a bit faster. I think it's going to be a bit slower on the A500, but it plays fairly well. But both the ST and Amiga versions, it's one of those early 16-bit games where if it had been done a few years later, it would have been a bit more polished and I think a bit more playable. The big problem with Space Harrier is it's always going to be a big ask to port it onto limited hardware, and I think, to be honest, Space Harrier is one of those games you need to either play on MAME or get the version for the 32X or the Sega Saturn.